Today's episode is sponsored by Cheryl Maccabee. Hello and welcome once again to Film Pro Productivity and Success, the podcast that helps film professionals and other creative people, all creative people really, to live a more focused, effective and happy life. My name is Carter Ferguson and this is episode 64, Rejection and Resilience. Finding an app or a piece of software that works for you and solves a productivity problem is never easy, and that's why I always look for a recommendation. Well, in last week's show, I talked to Productivity Matters podcast host Julian Koski about his 10 recommended apps which you can use right now to make your life and work much easier. And we also talked about how you can get the best out of any time management or productivity app or piece of software that you choose to download. It's a really fascinating episode and it's good fun too, and it's, I think, now one of my favourite shows, so please go back and check it out if you missed it. And if you like productivity apps or just productivity in general, then you can go ahead and subscribe not only to this show, which I should say probably more often, but also to Julian's show, Productivity Matters, as well. Today I'm going to be looking at something that virtually everyone that works in the creative industries will be familiar with: rejection. Confucius said, "Our greatest glory is not in never falling, but in rising every time we fall." And that's a quote that you will see appearing on social networks every so often these days, but it's very easy to just pay lip service to it and to dismiss and forget it when the time comes that you need to take that advice yourself. Building resilience to rejection isn't easy. So today I'm going to be looking at exactly what it is and what it means, and strategies that will help you to create and to maintain it. Sylvester Stallone says about this, "I take rejection as someone blowing a bugle in my ear to wake me up and get going, rather than to retreat," unquote. I trained as an actor, so I'm no stranger to rejection, let me tell you that. And I worked as a professional actor for 17 years. And although occasionally I do take on some small roles in films, if it sounds like fun and it works with my schedule, it's something that I no longer court. And I did pretty darn well as an actor, it must be said, and I had some great opportunities playing some great roles on television and film and in the theatre amongst some really big stars like Brian Cox, John Ely Miller, David Tennant, Sam Heughan, Peter Capaldi, Kevin McKidd, yada yada, name drop. But in all honesty though, I cannot say that I miss it, as in amongst those great roles that I did get and that I was cast for, I wasted countless days, weeks, months and years on fruitless auditions for parts I never came close to getting. As a filmmaker too, I have applied for funding more times than I can remember, filling in endless, long-winded forms, pulling together supporting information and presenting projects that I had quite literally spent years developing, only to be turned down again and again and again. The one thing I can tell you about all of those applications is I was never successful. Yep, you heard me right. I was never successful with a funding application. Applying for funding is a soul and career destroying endeavour that I would not want to inflict upon my worst enemy. You see, I finally realised through constant adversity that the funders just don't matter at all, and that a good film shot from the heart of a filmmaker with a unique voice will bypass all of the time wasting that we'd been caught up in. Stories of the rejection which I've faced in my years in this industry could fill up an entire season, to be honest, but that is not why I'm here. I faced down those rejections as they came along, and I look at them now after a long time has passed as simply experiences from which I have learned, and that learning is what I'm hopefully bringing to some of you today. And I also realise that they pale into insignificance when you consider these problems in inverted commas, that I'm talking about as part of a larger picture. I haven't been struck down by a crippling illness. I haven't lost a limb or a child or been caught up in a war. When I look at the plight of others in unfortunate or disastrous or heart-wrenching situations, the day-to-day problems which we all have to deal with as creatives just don't quite seem so important after all. But that said, they still exist, and they do wear us down. And if we let them get on top of us, they can lead to far more serious problems. The first ever study of suicide by profession, which covered England in the years from 2011 to 2015, showed that people who work in the arts or arts-related jobs are up to 4 times more likely to commit suicide. Among men working in culture, media and sport-related jobs, the risk is 20% higher, and among women, it is 69% higher. The risk is even more pronounced amongst individual professions. Male artists are more than twice as likely to commit suicide, and with female artists, the risk quadruples, and rates are also elevated amongst actors, entertainers, and presenters. There were 311 suicides amongst people working in culture, media and sport-related professions during that period of the study, which was, again, 2011 to 2015. But I didn't need a study to tell me this, because after 25 years in this profession, I have lost many friends along the way. Now, I'm tying those figures to an episode about rejection, not because the study directly mentions the topic next to that of suicide, but because it just can't be denied that the constant rejection which we face in this industry can wear away at our souls and dissipate our joy. And, I'm deliberately mentioning joy there, and I deliberately do something else in every show, and that is that I mention in the opener a more efficient, effective and happy life. Happiness is the end goal here. I once did a workshop thing where they said, what are your goals? What is your one goal in life? And I wrote down, make a film or, do this, that, the next thing, and success of the podcast, whatever I wrote down. And I eventually scrubbed it all out and wrote down to be happy, because I think that's the end goal here, isn't it, for all of us? Anyway, I'm going off piste here. It just can't be denied that the passion for our work wanes as we are slowly driven under by the small misfortunes and the years of rejection, and that's why I want to talk about all of this today. Character can't be developed in ease and quiet. Only through experience of trial and suffering can the soul be strengthened, ambition inspired, and success achieved. Helen Keller, unquote. So, adversity is a fact of life. And don't we know it? It's something that the great philosophers have discussed for centuries, and there are several lessons from history that pertain to this problem. The Greek philosopher Epictetus said, "Some things are in our control and others not. We control our opinion, pursuit, desire, aversion, and whatever are our own actions. Things not in our control are body, property, reputation, command, and whatever are not our actions. The things in our control are by nature free, unrestrained, and unhindered, but those not in our control are weak, slavish, restrained, belonging to others," unquote. In simple terms, these philosophers explain that we shouldn't waste our time worrying about things that are not in our control. Instead, these Stoics believed, Epictetus was one of them, and this is the big lesson here, so listen up. They believed that we should accept that misfortune will inevitably happen, but it is how we react to that misfortune or adversity or rejection that matters. And this brings me right back to resilience. Psychology today describes resilience as that ineffable quality that allows some people to be knocked down by life and come back at least as strong as before, rather than letting difficulties or failure overcome them and drain their resolve. They find a way to rise. And there's a big message in there that I want to highlight. Adversity can have an incredibly strong negative influence on us in the form of overwhelm. Difficulties and failures can, and often do, overcome us. And it's a real key topic of discussion in the world of productivity. What I particularly liked with that last quote, though, was the explanation of how difficulties can drain our resolve. And that's really what we're talking about here. We can put up with just so much before we find ourselves being overwhelmed, and eventually our resolve is drained away and we find ourselves in trouble. Building resilience means topping up and fortifying our resolve, which is essential if we're going to gain success in our chosen endeavours. If we can learn to cope with what are known as manageable threats, then over time we will become better able to cope with life's obstacles and hardships, both physically and mentally. Not all stress is harmful, and some stress is in fact necessary for us to grow and learn from our mistakes and our failures. And I must say that everything in my research pointed to the fact that the current trend in colleges and universities of offering safe spaces on their college campuses is just a terrible idea, as it sets students up for a very fragile life of potential misery in the world of employment beyond. Adversity has the effect of eliciting talents which in prosperous circumstances would have lain dormant. Horace, unquote. This episode is going out during the COVID-19 lockdown, and I'd like to think that the listeners to the show will at least see that the adversity that we now face can be used to push us to do better, to learn more, and to do more too. And that was kind of the point of that episode I did probably 9 or 10 episodes ago now, which was why self-isolation is a productivity gift. At that point, I only thought we were self-isolating, but we're about 4 weeks down the line now, 5 weeks down the line now, and we're ordered by our governments, certainly we are here in the UK, to stay in. I'm still seizing this as an opportunity. I saw a meme on Twitter the other day that suggested that Isaac Newton changed the world while he was in quarantine from the plague, and I had to just look it up to verify it, and it's true. When he was isolated during the Great Plague of London, Isaac Newton engaged in the ground-breaking discoveries that marked what he called his year of wonders. I've got an open webpage here. I'll just read a few of them to you. He helped develop calculus. He analysed colour, light, and the spectrum. And he studied gravity, which aided in the creation of his laws of motion. There's just 3 things pulled off a website that he did in the time that he had off. But I'm going slightly off piece. Let me get back on target. But do use this time that you've got. Don't waste it. I know I sound like a broken record here, and I know you've got worries, and I know perhaps the lockdown's going on longer than you wanted to, or you felt it was going to do. But hang on in there, make the best of it, because see, when this ends, you're going to be back to finding these moments in your work to try and do the stuff you need to do. This is your opportunity, so do try and take it. We need to face adversity to drive us forward to solve common problems. We need to fail if we are to learn from and transcend failure. Ultimately, failures are the stumbling blocks on the proverbial path to success. The lessons they teach have implications for humility, maturity, and empathy. And this doesn't mean that it's pleasant to fail, or that we can ignore the frustration that arises when a goal falls out of our reach. But if we can think intelligently about this and assume that attitude of high-level thinking on this topic that I talk about in episode 1, then we can deal with it, build our resilience to adversity, and maintain our resolve. A recent Harvard study said that everyone can learn to be resilient, unquote. So I've combined a few articles here to provide us with a series of strategies which will help us to do this, to become more resilient. Maya Angelou said, "I'm not sure if resilience is ever achieved alone. Experience allows us to learn from example. But if we have someone who loves us, I don't mean who indulges us, but who loves us enough to be on our side, then it's easier to grow resilience, to grow belief in self, to grow self-esteem, and it's self-esteem that allows a person to stand up, unquote. It's important to have people that you can confide in. While simply talking about a situation with a friend or loved one won't make your troubles go away, it does allow you to share your feelings, get support back, receive positive feedback, and come up with possible solutions to your problems. Self-criticism is an art not many are qualified to practice. Joyce Carol Oates, unquote. Now, I've covered this one in my earlier episodes, the inner critic, and what I get to in that episode is that when you hear negative comments in your head, then practice immediately replacing them with positive ones, such as, I can do this, I'm a great friend, mother, partner, filmmaker, sound operator, artist, whatever. Or I'm just good at my job. I know what I'm doing. This is kind of going into the recent episode 2 on affirmations, so you should definitely check out those 2 episodes if you think you've got a problem in this area. These techniques, though, will bolster your resilience and stem the flow of resolve if it starts to drain away. Seth Godin says optimism is the most important human trait because it allows us to evolve our ideas, to improve our situation, and to hope for a better tomorrow, unquote. And that's a really awesome quote, but I kind of prefer a similar one from Charlie Chaplin that covers the same bases. He says, "You'll never find rainbows if you're looking down," unquote. Positive thinking doesn't mean ignoring the problem in order to focus on positive outcomes. It means understanding that setbacks are temporary, and that you have the skills and abilities to combat the challenges that you face. What you are dealing with might be difficult, but it's important to remain hopeful and positive about a brighter future. And again, this takes me back to the Stoics. Accept that misfortune and adversity will occur in the world, so that when it happens, it doesn't catch you by surprise and bring you down. Don't be distracted by criticism. Remember, the only taste of success some people have is when they take a bite out of you. Zig Ziglar, unquote. That's a great quote too. I really enjoyed doing this episode. There's so much great wisdom in the world already about all of this. But what we're talking about here is self-esteem to some extent. Your self-esteem plays an important role in coping with stress and recovering from difficult events. Never forget to remind yourself of your strengths and your accomplishments. As I've said several times before on here, celebrating your accomplishments is part of the circle of productivity. And if you are in so much of a rush that you miss it out, you will find that your productivity falls away as you do so. So at the end of the day, at the end of a week, look back at what you've done. Don't focus on the negatives. Look at what you've achieved. I bet you even on your worst day, you still achieved something. Tied into this is that the fact that people who are able to come up with solutions to a problem are far more able to cope with problems than those who can't. I'll say that again. People who are able to come up with solutions to a problem are far more able to cope with problems than those who can't. By practicing problem-solving skills on a regular basis, you will be better prepared to cope when a serious challenge appears. Being active in working on solutions will also help you feel more in control rather than sitting back and letting life happen to you. George C. Lorimer said, "Putting off an easy thing makes it hard. Putting off a hard thing makes it impossible." Waiting for a problem to go away on its own only prolongs a crisis. So when misfortune occurs, start working on resolving that issue immediately. Don't hang around. Don't sit on it. While there might not be any fast or simple solution, you can still take steps towards making your situation better and less stressful. And accept that not every problem is immediately solvable. Sometimes you just have to accept that time will heal as well. One of the more famous quotes that I found during my research for this episode is by Frederick Douglass, who said, "If there is no struggle, there is no progress." So with that in mind, I want you to remember too that in addition to giving you better control over your emotions in this matter and learning to cope with adversity, the negative experiences which you encounter also provide lessons that will stop your failure from repeating itself in the future. Knowing this will help you to foster better resilience. Know that these negative experiences will make your future life better in some way. With your high-level thinking in place, and I do talk about that in episode 1, that's working on, I don't know if I mentioned this already, it's working on your life and career at the same time that you're living and working in it. Just getting your mind into a place where you're not just following the flow of life and work, but actually engaging in it and taking the reins, taking the steering wheel and controlling your life. But I digress. Where was I? If you've got this high-level thinking in place, then you can fortify your future by intelligently engaging in what went wrong, why things didn't work out, and if something that has been rejected or failed is worth repeating. In the end, I decided that I no longer wanted to waste my time on pointless funding applications, so I simply stopped. And by stopping, this allowed me to concentrate my efforts elsewhere and move forward in new and better ways to achieve my goals. When I think about the time that I wasted on funding applications, it always brings me back to the same Albert Einstein quote about insanity, which he defines as doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. That's why I gave up on the funding bodies. It was fucking pointless. But it took me a long time to realise that. And incidentally, last January, I applied for another random application, a project I've been working on for 5 years. Spent 2 weeks doing the application, pulled people in to help me, never even got an interview. It proved my point. I thought maybe things might have changed. I couldn't have been more wrong. But I have learned from that, and I will never do it again unless something else changes, unless I suddenly get the bug for making films again, and then I make a film which is actually brilliant. Then I think I've got a chance of getting funding. But while I'm just another name, I simply haven't got a hope in hell. Sylvester Stallone says, "I believe any success in life is made by going into an area with a blind, furious optimism." Personally, I try to avoid blind optimism, but I'll put that aside for the moment. Staying optimistic during dark periods is difficult, but I think that maintaining a hopeful outlook is totally vital and an important part of resilience. Optimism gets worn down in parallel to resilience and hope as well. But like resilience, it can be cultivated. My optimism in regard to filmmaking right now, as you can possibly tell from some of my attitudes towards this, is at rock bottom. It really is below low. It's like I can't find the enthusiasm, but I've started working on it, and I'm now looking for ways to reignite my passion for it. Somewhere along the way, I have a feeling that I will find it again, but I think it's a different episode. I think finding or rediscovering passion for your work or a hobby or a relationship possibly deserves a separate episode, and maybe not, but maybe I will do a show just on that topic because that's very much on my mind at the moment. Grain by grain, a loaf. Stone upon stone, a palace. George Bernard Shaw, unquote. The final piece of advice that I have for you here is that you should focus on the progress that you have made thus far and on planning your next steps rather than becoming discouraged by the amount of work that still needs to be accomplished to achieve your goals. So that's not looking back at the problems that have hurt you, but at the mountains potentially that you've got to still climb to get there. I'm still using my Your Best Year Yet strategy from the Jenny Ditzler book of the same name. And one of the big lessons which I took from it this year is to focus Focus on the baby steps that need to be made to take me closer to the larger goals that I've set up for myself rather than on the large goal itself. By having these smaller, more achievable goals, we can foster the feeling of moving forward that will in turn strengthen our feelings of resilience. In that Harvard review that I quoted, and it'll be linked to in the show notes as I say, it says that the capabilities that underlie resilience can be strengthened at any age. The brain and other biological systems are most adaptable early in life. Yet while their development lays the foundation for a wide range of resilient behaviours, it is never too late to build resilience. Age-appropriate, health-promoting activities can significantly improve the odds that an individual will recover from stress-inducing experiences. For example, regular physical exercise, stress reduction practices and programs that actively build executive function and self-regulation skills can improve the abilities of children and adults to cope with, adapt to, and even prevent adversity in their lives. Adults who strengthen these skills in themselves can better model healthy behaviours for their children, thereby improving the resilience of the next generation." Unquote. It takes time and lots of courage, but bolstering your resilience to adversity is worth it. When you get used to living through rejection, you receive the ultimate power, the confidence that you can handle any problem in your life. This makes you stronger than people who have avoided rejection their entire lives. Helen Keller said, "All the world is full of suffering. It is also full of overcoming." And your call to action this week is to think about the adversity which you have faced in your life and possibly face right now during this COVID-19 situation. And take a minute to write down what you have learned from it. If you can make sense of it and understand it, you will perhaps be able to avoid it happening to you in the future. And please also remember, folks, that as I've said many times before, you are 42% more likely to do things if you write them down. Writing your goals down, or these little tasks that I have sometimes set you, these calls to action, not only forces you to get clear on what exactly it is that you want to accomplish, but doing so also plays a part in motivating you to complete the tasks necessary for your success. I want you to be successful. When you listen to these episodes, always try and find a moment or two afterwards to take some notes and give the topics some additional thought. Talk about them to people too, and that'll help them to be secured in your mind. The full show notes for this will be in the on the official website, filmproproductivity.com, and a shortened version of it with quotes, etc. will be in your app as you're listening to this. But going and looking at them, putting some thought to it, will just help secure these things and make you a stronger person. I know a lot of you get energy from the energy I put into the show, but if you really, really want to make these things work for you, start to write some of them down, start to think about them, start to talk about them. Remember, folks, as well, that if you post a screen grab of you listening to the show, then I will give you a shout out in a future show. And no one gave me any shout outs this week, but if you fancy it, just screen grab your screen as you listen to the show and post it on a social media platform with a link to where your followers can listen. Do copy me into it as well, because if I don't know about it, I can't give you a shout out. And anyway, just if you feel like helping to promote the show, then please remember that retweets and shares are far more valuable than likes. A like basically says, I enjoy the show, whereas a retweet helps to promote it. But anyway, let me end today's show with a positive note and the words of Thomas Edison. It's a classic productivity quote, in fact, but it's quite fitting for today's topic. He said, "I have not failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work." Now take control of your own destiny. Keep on building that resilience to adversity. And join me next time on Film Pro Productivity and Success. music that you can hear right now is Adventures by Ehimitsu. You can view the show notes for this episode on the official website, filmproproductivity.com. You can follow my personal account on Twitter and Instagram at fight_director, or follow the show on Twitter at FilmProProdPod, or on Facebook at FilmProProductivity. Please support the show by subscribing, spreading the word, and leaving an awesome review.